Welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here. This is Trinity Radio, and I'm Braxton Hunter. And today is a little bit different. This is my home that you see all around me. I don't think I've ever filmed in my home before. And if you can see right over my right shoulder, you see my dog Indiana sitting on a pillow. Indy. And there he is. Indy. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to let you hear a message from my pastor. Now, if you missed the live stream yesterday where my pastor and I sat down and answered some of the criticisms that skeptics have of pastors, we went through a whole bunch that people sent me on Twitter, what their problems are with pastors. And so we went through all of that. It's a great stream, and it helps you to get to know my pastor a little bit. So if you haven't seen that, I want you to check that out. But what we're going to do here today is we're going to look at a message, a sermon. Now, this sermon I'm really excited about because this sermon is the beginning of a sermon series that he had called the Centered Series. I played one of the sermons from it, not this one, last fall. But the great thing is they're all out, so you can binge on them. So if you enjoy what you hear in this message, you can go through the whole series. And what it will do is it will explain to you why the Christian worldview is a reasonable and defensible one to hold. But it also teach you about just how worldviews work, how they're formed. And I think it's a sermon that is just right for the Trinity Radio audience, whether you're a skeptic or not. And he starts out with a great discussion of Big Bang Theory, which is one of my favorite shows. So I hope you enjoy it. Stick with it all the way, and we'll begin right now.
Well, there you go. It is October 20th, everybody, and if you've been around One Life for a while, you know we've been anticipating this day for quite a while. In prayer, for one thing, we've been on a 21-day journey of prayer and fasting. A number of you have been fasting towards this, and I really appreciate all of you who did this. I've heard today there were some high school students that participated in that, and then last night, apparently they broke their fast by just going to the local grocery store and buying Doritos and donuts and everything they could think of and just shoving it down, making themselves sick. It was great. Just a wonderful, wonderful time. But what they didn't know is that all this anticipation is going to lead up to, among other things, we are going to really find out what is behind the fence at Area 51. That's one of the things that we're going to do during our Centered Series. You'll have that. Now, believe it or not, that is very, very relevant to what we're going to be talking about as we travel through over the next few moments. And I want you to remember the cast of characters that you just saw. The kind of serious military guy. You have the lady that had the antennae going kind of back and forth and all that, because it will be used here in just a few moments. Now, what Centered is all about, and the reason we're making such a big deal out of it, is our goal is over the next 7 weeks is to do everything we can to build a Christ-centered worldview in everybody's life. To build a Christ-centered worldview and know what that means and what it's all about, and to have confidence in a Christ-centered worldview, but also be able to have conversations out of a Christ-centered worldview. And what today is, though, is I'm just going to be setting the table, so to speak, just getting some introductory ideas out there. And the one thing I can say about that is the material itself is going to be a little bit different than standard church Bible study, preaching stuff, okay? It is a Bible study, it absolutely is. It's just going to take it from a little bit different angle. Now, and sometimes it'll come across a little classroom-ish kind of stuff. It won't sound as preachy, although every now and then, just so you'll know you're in a church, I'll wave my arms and yell a lot, okay? So just so you'll know that kind of thing is still in our world, all right? So be aware of that. But we need to do this, and here's why. Because for the 50% of all of you who might have been in the room across all three of our campuses, you know that we showed a clip from a show called Young Sheldon. And Young Sheldon is a spinoff of Big Bang Theory, a very popular sitcom. And Sheldon is a genius. Sheldon is a scientist. Sheldon's a super, super bright guy. He's all about facts. He's all about science. And one of the subtexts and subplots of his life, both in Big Bang Theory and what Young Sheldon is about, is his mom is a believer. She's a church-going person. She's a Baptist specifically. And honestly, what the writers do is you're supposed to identify with Sheldon. He's kind of a lovable guy. He's a genius, and he's really the smart one. He is, because he's all about the facts. And his mom is lovable and all those things, likable, but she is kind of a knucklehead. Okay, and that's how they present her back and forth. Now, our culture does this all the time. And one of the reasons that we're going to be studying the things that we're studying, among other things, is that we need to learn how to navigate in a culture that is presenting, scientific ideas and naturalistic ideas as the smart way to go. And what all of us are doing right now is the not so smart way to go. Now, it's all not about brainiac things, but that's one of the critical reasons that we're talking about this. We need to know why we believe and what we believe. And for those of you who may not be Christ-following people, hopefully you'll look at faith and you'll look at all the different options out there with a little bit different eyes than you had before. So, the first thing we need to do is we do need to define the term worldview, because we're going to be using that term a lot, and that's kind of what we're going for. It's not a word drawn from the Bible. It's kind of a summary of much of the Bible. Let me give you a definition that I looked up. You can Google it. You can get a lot of great definitions. I found this one. Worldview is the fundamental cognitive orientation of an individual or society's encompassing the whole or individuals or society's knowledge and point of view. A worldview can include natural philosophy, fundamental, existential, and normative postulates, or themes, values, emotions, and ethics. I read you that one so you would like mine better. Okay, let's just set that up. Now that was true, but that's not the working definition we are going to use. The working definition that we're going to be using throughout this series is this. Your worldview is what you believe about the most important and meaningful questions of life. Your worldview is what you believe about the most important and meaningful questions of life. So that's where it starts. It starts with the questions of life. And there's lots of very meaningful, deep ones. Like what's behind the fence at Area 51 is not one of the important and meaningful ones. It's kind of interesting, but it's more questions like this. First one, kind of the ultimate one is this: where did everything come from? Where did everything come from? We all kind of arrived and we look around and we're in the middle of a story and there's stuff everywhere and there's people everywhere and we know there's a past. Where did it start from? Did someone make everything? Did it just start itself? Is it all eternal? There's all kinds of different options about where it all came from, but that's one of the questions. The second thing is, who are we? Who are we as human beings? Are we spiritual? Are we purely animal and physical? Are we somewhere in between? Answering that question is a very, very important thing. Here's a big one. What's wrong? What's wrong with the world? I mean, you look around, life is awesome. Life can be wonderful and fantastic. We also know life can be terrible at times, right? And did you ever notice that there is a direct relationship between how much of a hurry you're in and how many stoplights you get stopped at? You ever notice that before? That's just kind of a law, whatever. The more in a hurry you are, the more you stoplights you are going to be stopped at. Somehow it knows. There's things wrong with the world. The other question is, what's the cure for what's wrong? Is it more education? Is it other things that we could be doing? And here's a really good one. A worldview has to do with answering the question, is there hope ultimately in life? Because I hate to remind everybody, but every single one of us is going to die. We're all going to die. Is there true hope beyond the grave? Or, scientists say the entire universe is going to die at some point. Is there hope beyond that, or is it just the end? Now again, if you're a Christ-following person, you've been going to church, you've been doing all these things, you may think, I know exactly what I think about these things. Isn't that kind of the point? Yes, you probably do. The goal with you is to help you know it and understand it on a deeper level and the reasons why you believe it. But also, you and I are walking around in a culture that's not only pushing back against it and making us look a little dumb, honestly, but also increasingly, we live in a pluralistic society where lots of different worldviews are walking around with us. That's where we're going to be talking about conversations. Now, the thing that all these different questions have in common is they all are about the unseen, and that's what today is about. It's really about the nature of belief, and that's where the Area 51 thing comes in. You see, all belief, no matter what your belief system is, whether you're a Christ-following person, whether you're an atheist, whether you're in the Eastern religions or whatever you happen to be into, all of those questions are answered by the unseen. Now, what we do is we look around at the seen things, But looking at a tree or looking at the dirt underneath my feet can't tell me whether or not there is a life after this one. It's all based upon unseen things. What's behind the fence at Area 51? It's one of the big questions. Is there, and the way it went was in Roswell, New Mexico back in the late 40s, there was a flying saucer that crashed, and the government took it, and they took the bodies of the aliens, and they examined them, and they've done reverse engineering on all these flying saucers. That's what that cast of characters believed, and they were arriving there to storm it about a month ago and all the rest. And about 2 million people were supposed to show up, about 2,000 people did, but they looked like they had a good time, kind of partying. But that was the whole thing. It's still an unseen thing. All of them are unseen. Now, here's the thing about it, too, is that when it comes to these unseen answers to these questions, every single person under the hearing of my voice right now has answers to those questions. You have a worldview. You do. Now, your worldview may be very casual. You never really thought about it much, but I promise you, if I pulled you aside and said, where do you think it all came from, you would give your answer. I think it's always been here. I think it all came from nature. I think it all came from God. You would say something like that. Or you might answer, I don't really know. Well, that's your worldview. I don't think we can know. But every single person has a belief system around these questions. Now, scientists will tell you, and philosophers and everybody else will tell you, some would say that there's only 3 options for worldviews. I don't particularly believe that. Some others would say that when it comes to worldviews and answers to these questions, there's as many options as there are people. Now, I fall a little bit closer to the fewer options. Now, what I'm going to do over today, and then over the next several weeks, I'm going to use kind of a 4-part grid to talk about the nature of belief and beliefs themselves, and kind of illustrate the different worldview things, and we'll see how it all comes together. And it's going to be a 4-part thing that starts with all beliefs begin with claims. With claims. All beliefs start with claims. I know what's behind the fence at Area 51. It is the flying saucers. It is the aliens that they're experimenting with. Or someone else may say, no, I know what's behind there. It's nothing. You're a freak show. There's nothing back there. Neither one of us see, but a claim is made. Every single worldview says something about, I know where everything came from, or I know. I make a claim about. Now, of all the different beliefs that are out there, there's technical definitions that I want you to be familiar with. Again, we're just kind of setting the table today. But I'm going to give you 5 different options that are alive in our culture, that are kind of popular and everything else. The first one's theism. Theism was what most Christians believe. Theism is defined by those outside as God is a personal creator who intervenes in human affairs. He's a personal creator. Remember that. Some of you would throw your vote behind that one. This one's a very important one. Naturalism. Naturalism means there is no God. Humans are just highly evolved animals. The universe is a closed physical system. Now, this one sounds kind of repulsive to some of us, but you need to know it's very popular in academic circles in the United States of America. It is Sheldon's worldview. He's a scientist. He's all about physical. And what it's saying is that the only thing in reality is physical objects. Atoms, molecules. There is no spiritual, there is nothing else besides that. That's naturalism. On the opposite spectrum of that, there's what's called pantheism. Pantheism, and all these are isms, they're technical definitions. And pantheism can be defined this way. God is the totality of reality, thus we are all divine by nature. In other words, God is not personal, but he is spiritual, and in a sense, everything is spiritual, no matter what it is. The Force in Star Wars kind of played with this idea a little bit. It's a combination of a couple things. But most Eastern religions, New Age, those who are into Wicca, you could probably file this under the belief that everything is spiritual. That's pantheism. Islam. Islam is something we're exposed to more and more all the time. When the shooting happened in New Zealand, a friend of mine said he and I ought to go show just compassion and grace to we were able to go right up the street and got to attend a Muslim service, watch it all go on and everything, and talk to the imam and everything. So it's something that's a part of our lives more and more. Here's what their worldview says. There is only one God, and he has no son. They're very explicit about that. God has revealed his will for all people through his final prophet, Muhammad, and his eternal word, the Quran. That's their worldview. Now, here's the one that I want you to remember as much as any of them, besides naturalism, because those are the most prevalent in the United States. what philosophers call moralistic therapeutic deism. You know what that means? God just wants us to be happy and nice to other people. He intervenes in our affairs only when we call on him to help out. That's also another name for American secularism, or what I call the Disney worldview, the fairy godmother worldview. God just wants us to be happy and nice to other people. He intervenes in our affairs only when we call on him to help us out. Now, some of you, when you heard that, you probably thought, wait a minute, that sounds like what I believe, Well, it may be. Now, you need to know that's not a Christ-centered worldview. That's just kind of a way a lot of Americans look like because they've watched a lot of Disney movies. That's just kind of how things go. But it's answering all those different questions. Now, everybody has a combination of one of those things, and that's why we're encouraging you to get inside different groups to talk about these things and flesh these things out. And you'll notice they're going on out in culture if you watch things like Young Sheldon. Now, the next thing is this. So all these belief systems have claims. Now, the way I want you to remember claims is a piece of paper with a question mark and an exclamation point, okay? All of them try to answer the questions. The next one is this: reasons. All beliefs have reasons. And the way I want to symbolize that is scales, just testing things, testing evidence in the balance. Everybody, no matter what your belief is, you have reasons why you believe it. Ever notice that? You absolutely do. Now, when you're watching this film with the lady with, I kind of make fun of the lady with the antenna, at least she's all into her belief system, and she is into it. The last guy said, I don't want to call it a cult, but it's a belief system. We all believe these things, and you can tell the level of belief kind of on how they dress. She did the whole goggles thing and the deal on top of her head and the silver suit. I believe this, I'm in. And you notice what she said. The proof is there. The proof is there. I know exactly what's behind that fence at Area 51, and I believe it. She has reasons, and she named a reason. She said it was a mentor that she had that was an expert in these things. Now, the military guy, he was more of, did you know, maybe you don't remember this, but I've seen this clip quite a bit. He said he was in the military and even dealt with paranormal realities. I thought, does the military do that? Is like Ghostbusters a real thing? He named paranormal. Like they send us into houses sometimes that is possessed, and we go in there with holy water or something. I mean, he named that. Of course, a friend of mine said, I really kind of doubted that guy was in the military at all. We don't know what was going on. But he was obviously a lot more technical about his beliefs. He knew it. He was kind of more serious-minded. He'd at least be very interesting to sit down and have a conversation with. But everybody, no matter who you are, you believe what you believe for reasons. You do. You have reasons. Some of them are very thought through, very logical. You've read a lot of books. Others of you, I don't know, I thought that Disney movie was really, really good, and I cried during it, so I have those reasons to believe that therapeutic deism thing going on, okay? When the Apostle Peter was trying to coach a group of Christians back in the first century through the struggles they were having because they were being persecuted actively by other people for their beliefs, for their worldview. And in 1 Peter chapter 3, he says this, and this is a passage that we're going to look at more and more and more, familiar to some of you, but it says this, in response to all that stuff you're dealing with. It says, in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. We've asked you to do a number of things during this series. Is to listen to all the messages, get in a group, but also listen to the podcast. It's a once-a-week thing, and what we're going to do with the podcast, that's where we're going to talk about reasons and conversations. Reasons and conversations. How to be prepared and how to have conversations across belief systems. But then he says this, but do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. So we're going to talk about how to actually do that. But notice that he says, if you're a Christ-following person, you ought to have reasons. You do have reasons probably, but you ought to have things prepared for them. Now the next one's this, is implications. And this is my favorite one, but it's also a little bit more difficult to get a grasp on. In implications, I want you to remember the word if. What implications are, they're arguably the most important thing. When it comes to beliefs, all beliefs have implications. If this is true, then it follows that this is true. You guys have all heard that, the famous little saying that of Socrates, I'm sorry, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Socrates is mortal. Okay, that kind of, if this is true, then that's true. Now, it's not formal logic that way, but there is, when it comes to beliefs, implications of it. What are the implications of if we finally did discover that the government really was hiding flying saucers behind the gate at Area 51? There's real aliens back there. There's real flying saucer. It at least has implications of, wow, that's kind of significant. The government keeps things from us. For one thing, we know that. That's an implication. But it also means there really are people out there looking in my cousin who claimed to be, abducted by aliens. Man, I should have listened to him. He wasn't as crazy as I thought. That kind of thing. I don't have a cousin like that, by the way. But maybe you do. But it changes the score. The implications are we would look at the universe different. Every single belief system has implications to it. If everything is physical, the way Sheldon believes, then there is no spiritual. You don't have a soul. There's no life after death. There's no nothing. It just means that when you die, you're going to die, and that's it. Everything's physical. Now, when the Apostle Paul, he was talking to the people of Corinth, and he had preached the gospel to them, and one of the things that he emphasized, and if you'll pay close attention, I emphasize this as much as I possibly can, that Jesus Christ, when he rose again from the dead, he was literally physically dead, and he literally physically and historically got up from the grave. He did. Physical body. It's very, very, very important for reasons that we'll discover as we travel. But he said that was true. Now, if you were a Greek-thinking person, which was his audience back then, they struggled with that a lot. They believed that physical things, their worldview was that physical things were actually bad and spiritual things were good. That's not a Christian worldview. Both are good because God made them, all right? So they had false teachers come in behind him and say, there is no resurrection from the dead, because not only did Paul say that Jesus rose again from the dead, but you're going to too. That's your hope beyond the grave. And false teachers would come in and say, no, physical things are terrible. You don't want that. Listen to Paul's language in response to this and how he talks about implications. He says, and if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. That's kind of blunt. More than that, we are then found to be false witnesses about God, for we have testified about God that he raised Christ from the dead. But he did not raise him if in fact the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, then Christ has not been raised either. Now listen where he goes. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. Here's all the implications. Your faith is futile, you're still in your sins, then those who have fallen asleep in Christ are lost. If only for this life we have hope in Christ, we are to be pitied above all men. That's pretty striking, isn't it? In other words, if Jesus didn't get up from this, you wasted your time. It was stupid of us to sing songs and pray prayers and give offerings and listen to preachers and all the rest. Everything is gone. That's a pretty profound implication. And all beliefs, especially worldviews, every one of them, including the Disney one, have implications, and learning how to think through what their implications are is very important. Now I'm going to give you an opposite implication. Sheldon's worldview is naturalism. There's a great documentary out called Why Are We Here? And it features a guy named Ard Louis. Ard Louis is a professor of physics at Oxford University. Brilliant man, also a Christian believer, belying kind of this reputation that Christians are just no sense in their head kind of people. But they did a documentary where Ard Louis and an unbelieving friend of his, they go around to talk about these very things that we're talking about with different philosophers and scientists. And I want you to hear the implications that someone who really does believe what Sheldon believes, naturalism, everything is physical, I want you to hear from his own mouth what he says the implications are. Watch this. Now, his name was Alex Rosenberg, and he's not kind of some far-out guy. He is a professor of philosophy at Duke University. And what he was giving you is the implications and what he believes about the universe. It is all physical. You notice what he said? Is there God? Of course not. And what is the meaning of the universe? There isn't one. What's the purpose of life? There isn't one of those either. I was fascinated that he said there's really no true difference between right and wrong. That's an implication that he knows of. And then my favorite one was when he was asked about free will. Is there free will? Not a chance. Now, why would he say something? That's a pretty profound implication. I could have swore I got up this morning, I wanted to go to church, and I'm even thinking about getting fried chicken at Cracker Barrel. You mean you're not doing that freely? You know what he would say is that because everything is physical, ultimately everything comes down to atoms and molecules, that it's your atoms and molecules that are just kind of firing together to make you want to go to Cracker Barrel and eat fried chicken. That's the second message. I've really centered in on that idea, is fried chicken at Cracker Barrel. And it just needs to happen as I break my fast. That's just got to happen. But you catch that with implications? Extremely important. And when you think through, when Sheldon's made to look all smart, he's talking about science, he's dismissing all those things, they don't talk about the implications of, we don't even believe in free will. We don't even believe in the necessity of a thing called right and wrong. Pretty interesting. The final one is this. Actions. All beliefs lead to actions. And I'm going to symbolize that with an arrow. There's a great quote I love by a guy that's been a president of a couple different universities, and now he works with a ministry that talks about these kinds of things. His name is Dr. Bill Brown. Listen to what he says about beliefs. You may not live what you profess. In other words, you can say you believe a lot of things. You may not live according to that. But you will live what you really believe. You may not live what you profess, but you will live what you really believe. What's he saying there? Well, I can say I believe Jesus all I want. But if I really believe it, it can't help but affect my life. It's kind of going back to the lady with her antennae and her glasses. She really believes this. The proof is there. So it affected her dress, it affects her social life, it affects how she views the world all the way around. This stuff is not heady stuff in the end. What it really is about is getting to the true heart of what we really, truly believe. I've told the story before, but I'll tell it again. When it comes to this whole thing of what happens when we die, a good friend of mine has been a hospice nurse for many, many years and became a Christ follower because she said she watched over and over again the difference between how people die. She said the people who knew Christ died a different way than those who didn't, and she watched it over and over and over again through the years and said, finally, I got to sign up for this team over here because it's completely different. How you look at death itself will affect how you behave. How you look at the meaning of life, how you look at Christ and who he is, will affect how you do things. Now, with all that put together, here's what I want to do. We're going to introduce everybody. You've already had a little bit of it earlier in the services across all three campuses. We had a reading today that included this passage. The centerpiece passage of all that we're going to be talking about in the next several weeks is found in Colossians chapter 1. It's called the Christ hymn. And I want you to think about everything that we've just talked about. And then what we're going to do here in a moment is we're all going to stand up across all three campuses and we're just going to read it out loud. And I'm hoping that you'll hear it is a microcosm of a true Christ-centered worldview. So everybody stand together wherever you are across all campuses. And the Christ hymn is going to come up on the screens. And we are going to read it together out loud. And if you don't believe these things, you don't have to read it out loud, or you can mutter something else so people won't kind of call you out. Just do the lyrics to your favorite song or some such thing like that, okay? Let's say it together. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. You can have a seat. Now, I hope that you heard those words, maybe just even a little bit different when we read at that time, in light of all that we've talked about. And what we're going to be doing, and another thing we're going to ask you to do is on our app, we have daily Bible readings that are going to focus on this passage, because if I don't have any other goal, I want us to learn that passage. Memorize it, understand it, know what it is, and see the world that way. Because can't you see, when it comes to actions, that if that's really true, I mean really true, it should impact everything I do, every way I speak, my attitudes, my life, my job, my everything else.